putting this together in a series of workshops. The one tonight is on the airport. I'll get into that here momentarily. That's going to probably take us a couple hours, maybe 2 to 2.5 to 3, depending on how chatty everybody is tonight. And I need an answer on that so we can move forward for the next year's budget. It's in your budget for a lot of this, but I need some policy decisions and go or no-go decisions from council moving forward on the airport. Beyond that, we've got one set up now for at 5 o'clock on November 20th. Before our council meeting, that will be in 2C. We will be covering the Ohio Challenge. They've raised some issues on parking and funding that they've asked us to consider. We've got a presentation ready for you, and I'm sure Dave Pierce and his group will be there. But the idea is to try to get those issues laid out in front of council, get some input from them so we know how to move forward with that. Assuming at that meeting we will also be able to cover the certified local government that we've heard about with the Oakland redevelopment project that was presented to council a meeting or two ago. The nuts and bolts of that, how that works, and how we might incorporate that into the city if council so desires. We also have some interest in vacant property ordinances, both downtown and throughout the community. Some interest in smart cities and Wi-Fi, particularly for downtown, but we've also been talking about smart city through our residential housing committee. And we also have a request to rename a couple streets and parks. And at least in the 4.5 years I've been here, we've not done that. And so it's been a while since we've named a park, and we have a new council. And I asked what the policy was, and the answer was, well, they did it about 10 years ago, and we don't really know what the policy is. So I said, time to circle back and revisit. So we will start knocking these down. Tonight will be the airport. We'll go on to the Ohio Challenge and see the certified local government. And I will have all of these other topics ready to go. So if we quickly resolve one, we can continue to move. If we get bogged down on one, then we'll stop and regroup for the next one, and I'll have them all ready to go. But that's kind of the style of what we'll do until we get these issues caught up and we all are on the same page on how we're going to move forward. The reason I asked you to do especially the airport first and the airport only tonight is in your budget for next year, I think is, if I remember right, $2.4 million for capital for the airport. We are at a go or no-go place at the airport. You've seen council retreats and prior presentations on the airport, a conceptual plan to start redeveloping. You've helped us purchase the access off of Hook Road. We took a loan from MMF to look at infrastructure to put a street and utilities over to start getting that ready to go. And we are now at the place where we're at our master plan, our airport layout plan. It's time to start getting our education hangar together with the $750,000 that the state has put in the capital budget for us. We are at the place where it's going to go from conceptual to execution starting next year. And so we wanted to spend some time laying this out one more time and ask you again, are you ready to go on this? Because we are probably going to ask you to spend somewhere up approaching $10 million at the airport over the next decade. Each piece, I hope, will be smart and you'll think it's a good idea. But the idea is to lay this out for you, and so that at least before we get started, you say, conceptually, we hear you. If it comes back and it looks good, we'll consider it, but we're ready to move forward with development of the airport. So we're going to spend some time tonight talking about where we've been, some of the infrastructure we've done, the state of aviation, different pieces. We're going to give John Hart a chance to talk about skydiving, tourism, and the economic impact of those types of activities at the airport, some of the natural conflicts between uses at the airport, some time for public discussion and public comments, but then at the end we're going to circle back to, we kind of need to make a decision at this point whether or not we are go or no go to fully develop the airport into an asset. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Matt Eisenbraun to get us started. I'll let you take the wheel.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, council, everyone. Appreciate your time and effort to come out and learn about the airport and help us move forward with it. My portion here is really the history of the airport, short form, and then really what we have done since I became involved directly with the airport starting in 2012. So really kind of give us how did we get here to today, and then we'll have a couple of other presentations that will give you a better idea of exactly what we're looking at this point. So make sure. Technologically, history and development, that is my portion. Nice picture that we received from Magellan last year. They were going through the archives and showing some of the historic work that was done out there. To get started with the airport, as a project, the airport started in the 20s through a civic association that was put together to develop the airport specifically. Once the Airport Park Inc. company was formed, they hired George Wiedekin to manage the facility, and the site was the former location specifically of the Farnsworth Ferret Farm, and he was known as the Ferret King of Middletown. Now, I've been doing tours at the airport for a number of years. I maintain and read again tonight that it was the largest ferret farm in North America. I continue to research whether or not it is the largest in the world at that time. I'll get back with you on that. Operations at the airport began in May of 1926 with the landing of the first de Havilland Army plane. We became known as a transport site leading up to the war, is my understanding, and that's where we got a lot of the operations started. In 1937, the first economic development incentive package, privately raised, is my understanding as well, was utilized to relocate the Aranca facility from Cincinnati. That's where they took the building down, block by block, numbered them, brought it all up here, put it back together the same way, and then enhanced it. At its peak, Aranca employed 3,800 people and produced 50 planes a day. And for those that aren't familiar with the Aranca plane, that's the overwing plane, the high wing plane. And if you've ever seen the World War II movies, it's the one where the person's hanging out, taking pictures down this way, and kind of doing that thing. But that was the basis for the private aviation industry after the war. And Middletown, I think, can claim some ownership of that role as the aviation developed in America. After World War II, George Wiedekin was granted the rights to own the buildings and operate the airport. That is one business model. We use that model for a number of decades where the person who's out there is actually operating it. They own the assets, and when they have a stake in the game, they're going to do a better job of making sure that we're getting the best opportunities out of the airport and we're getting the best return on our investment that we can. Those rights were later transferred to Mike Hogan, who continued to build the additional hangars and development of aviation activities out at the airport, and that continued for quite a while. That's a great model to work from. It seems to work, but we've kind of changed from that to what I think it would be considered the second leading model in that. We'll talk about that in a second. The next major economic development activity was in 1969 with a 1,000-foot extension to the current length of 6,100. The total cost of that project in '69 was $320,500. It's a pretty substantial investment. And that extension allowed the airport to service large corporate aircraft and freight transport planes. I think the key there is that when I am out talking to different entities in the community, in the aviation world, when you look at the airport, one of the key aspects the FAA and other aviation support entities are looking at is, are we getting the most we can after all of this investment is put in there? The replacement cost of an airport such as ours, if we were to build it clean now, is a pretty substantial amount. I've heard a couple of different estimates. I won't throw them out. But the idea is it's hundreds of millions of dollars to create what we've got. And we've had that fortune of having that develop over time, and we need to continue to capitalize on that. In May 2005, the city purchased the airport's assets from Mike Hogan and began to formally operate the airport. The city entered into contracts regarding the management and the FBO services required at an airport, but eventually both of those services came underneath the same entity. And that's fine, except we own the buildings, and we wanted to make sure that, again, we're getting the most that we can out of that. That's where I think we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can because of the investment. And because of all of the efforts from the FAA and ODOT, they're always going to be looking at making sure that everyone is paying their fair share and making sure if they get access to the assets that that's taken care of. All right, so that's a little bit on the history. That brings us up to about the time I came on board, 2012, 2013. In essence, at the height of the Great Recession and faced with the transition of two key positions out at the airport, the decision was made to review the overall operation and work towards trying to give some relief to the annual subsidy. Coming through the recession, everyone understands and remembers what we were going through, talking about laying off firefighters, police officers, public safety, those kinds of things, and so certainly we were really watching every dime as we went through. After a review and consideration of the opportunities, responsibility for coordinating the airport was moved to the Economic Development Department. One of the key members that left at that point was the staff liaison. That was the finance director. He was retiring. And, okay, we have some sound.
Back on. Flashlight. I had it in the car.
This is what it's been like all day.
I know. This is kind of the worst nightmare. What about you people?
Hit the light switch. I don't know what else. We can proceed to a certain extent. You won't have the benefit of the pictures, but they were mainly supplemental anyways. So at the height of the Great Recession, the decision was made to change the way we were approaching the airport. The other key position that was changing over at that time was the airport manager, again, because of some of the frustrations in working in that type of system and other things. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but that the manager retired at that point, and so we were left with that transition point, make some decisions, and decide how we were going to move forward. I think. Okay. Again, I don't want to put any words in your mouth. This is Rich. Rich was the manager at that point, and he resigned. So at that point, I think we looked at it initially, quickly trying to identify areas that we could adjust the business operation out there, obviously looking at increasing revenues and decreasing expenses. We came up with a list of 16 items that we wanted to review over the first year as quickly as possible. I think we went through those. There's still a couple of outstanding ones. But I think we've done a pretty good job of doing exactly that, raising revenues and lowering expenses. Can't say anything about that. I think we're full. We don't have any vacancies at this point, and so under the current situation, we're about as good as we're going to get. It's a question of, again, how do we move forward? All right.
Yeah, where is this?
We're getting there, okay. Hold on a second, I can do that. You log in under you.
I did.
Yeah.
You did.
You need to get back out and go under you?
If you would.
I can do that.
If you can get it to that point. During the 12 and 13 time frame, we also did a couple of other background research area work. We did a market study using Gibraltar Consulting, and basically that was going out and looking at the local 10, 12 airports that were like size to us, see how things were going with them, how they were making money, and how they were trying to develop. We also began to work with the FAA to understand where we were as far as the...
Ready for you.
We're ready for me. We will get there. Working too fast. Sorry about that. And then right there on the desktop. Back. Slideshow. From the beginning?
Yep, I'll let you catch up. Until next time.
There we go. Began talking to the FAA, ODOT, about the aviation system. A lot of things were changing at that point. We did a grant status review, which was interesting because once we began to talk about what we wanted to do with the airport, we seemed to get a lot of support for some of the things we were indicating. And in essence, the FAA came back to us and said, if based on where we were going ultimately, if we reworked some of the paperwork for the grants that were still outstanding and the grants we were working forward, we could get some credit back, and we were given a remittance of about $300,000 reimbursed for projects we had previously done. And again, because we adjusted some of the ways we were doing things, we were able to get that money back. That supplied us with match money. And with that in mind, I think that's why the FAA said, hey, I think we like where you're going and we want to be supportive. We began to shoot for, at their suggestion, a all-encompassing one-time shot of about $2.5 million to repave everything at the airport, replace all the different lighting systems. The reason they thought that was an opportunity for us is because going through the recession, a lot of the grants were defaulted on. And so they had a pool of money they were trying to give away. So we worked during 14 and 15 towards that, and we'll return to that point in a second as we go through. So with the idea that we were going to try and move forward, we thought about creating a business plan. We asked for the opportunity to do a master plan. They were not receptive to that idea, and so we fell back to the second layer idea or process by which we could begin moving the airport forward, which was the creation of a strategic conceptual layout, which basically was, the idea given to me is just a piece of paper that you're saying that's what we're doing. It doesn't play any role, it doesn't have any significance, but everybody understands where you're going. And what they're going to see and what they're going to want to see is what you're doing to continue down the path and do what you say you're going to do as far as your plans are concerned. So in 2014, we created a strategic conceptual layout. The mission and vision of which were part of that. You can read through, but I think through the discussions and the efforts of everybody at the airport, we came up with some pretty good ideas of where we wanted to go. So mission to provide safe, quality, efficient business, education, and recreational aviation facilities, the facilities themselves, to aid the economic health of the region. And then the vision was to become the region's aviation gateway of choice. So again, based on those, we move forward with this. And again, just a piece of paper kind of outlining where we are. I think the key concepts here are let's take every idea and let's put them up on the wall and see what sticks. And so really there was nothing that we heard that we were thinking about that was a bad idea. The thought was that we're going to see where this goes. We'll do the research, we'll do the background, and we'll find out what's going to really make money for us in the end. And I think from an overall concept standpoint, the key is we created a number of campuses. And that's what I'm going to point out here. I think the key thing is here we were looking at what can we do with the west side, and we ended up focusing on industrial, commercial, corporate aviation. Those have different definitions depending on who you're talking to, but it's basically bringing in business aviation, a job creation opportunity. On the north side, up here along the yellow bar, north of the grass runway, the idea was to put recreation activities up there. We can begin to migrate the different activities, events, clubs, groups to the north side, give them their own access, and they wouldn't interfere with what was going on operationally. And then down over here along the road, where all of the main buildings are, was to continue to develop corporate traffic and begin to talk to corporations, base jets, rental jets, leasing opportunities, those kind of things to begin kicking up the number of operations and the number and types of planes that we were bringing in. But in essence, you'll see there again, a whole variety of things that we wanted to talk through. Up here along the corner, Germantown Road, right there as you enter the airport, talked about a terminal. I don't know that a terminal is ever going to be built out there, but certainly as a concept, as an idea of what we would like to do with the airport, it certainly could play a role. Down along in here, talked about retreat centers, conference centers, a welcome center, pretty generic, but again, what can we do with the airport to bring in more community members, to begin to bring together what all the airport is capable of doing. And then again, on the west side, what kind of industrial opportunities can we be there? So it's really those things that we wanted to get into and research the most. But again, no ideas were turned down. We all came to consensus for the most part that we thought this was going to be the best approach. And again, it gave us a roadmap to move forward. During 15 and 16, we began to get additional input. I wanted to go through, ODOT does a statewide aviation study every several years, and we participated in that. We also participated in 16 in Butler County operational study. They wanted to see if joining forces would make sense. And in the end, we basically said we're going to start to rehabilitate as much as we can. We're going to start looking at the business model, and we're going to try and come up with the best opportunities we can. In the end, at the end of that time, we thought we had a pretty good case for where we were going. We made the ask for the all-encompassing multi-million-dollar grant. And they said, for the most part, we see what you're doing, we like where you're going, but we're not going to move forward with the grant at this point. We don't think that you have taken care of enough of those details to warrant this, mainly because we don't see what is happening at the airport as being worthy of maintaining the 6,100 feet. At that point, coming out of the recession, let's shrink runways, let's narrow runways, let's cut down on infrastructure because we don't have a lot of money coming through. That's the federal approach to things. It's shifted somewhat since then, but again, at that point when we said we want to just rehab everything at this point, they said we don't think that you have the operations and the business going on at the airport to warrant that. So we're going to go ahead at this point and go ahead and concur that moving forward with a new master plan is the way to go. So at that point, that's when they came around to that. We had flown up to Detroit. A group from the city made a trip up there. We made a presentation. We kind of laid it out, and in the end, again, that decision was made that the master plan was the way to go. All right, additional things we're doing is we're going through the Site Ohio certification and the master plan itself. This really gets us to a point of laying out what it is we want to do, more than the business plan, because they're not too worried about that. What are you doing with this facility? How are you going to develop it in the future? And does it make sense based on where you are and where you think you can go? Does it make sense to continue to invest that? Within the master plan process and submission, there is a current, future, and ultimate level of service they're looking for. So where are you now? Where do you want to be here in the not too distant future, but ultimately, where do you want to go? And are all of these things all working in sync together to get you to where you want to go? So we have worked through that master plan process. We've followed the guidelines and advisory circulars that are pertain to those. And again, in the end, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. We're making a great case. From an ED side, we participated in the Site Ohio certification. That's bringing all of our economic development assets to bear to say, hey, we're looking at this as a development project. This is not just a one-off, we're trying to find a way to raise some money here at the airport. What are we going to be doing over the next 5 to 10 years that's going to support the community, the asset itself, and the aviation community over the next 20 to 30 years. And again, the ED side of that is to get into the certification and begin using all of the assets, all of the resources we have to do that development. This is what we're selling. This is a quick review of that as I'm going out and around. 6,100 feet of runway, the longest uncontrolled runway in a 250-mile radius. I don't know if that's true anymore. I don't know if it ever was true.
Springfield now has it.
Springfield's got that opportunity. Yep. So we've got the opportunities there, but again, this is what I'm selling out there. As I go down, we've got great infrastructure, and we've got a lot of green space, flat ground that is developable. So as we're looking at that from an economic development standpoint, as we're talking to a prospect, everything that we need is right here. And we have things that others don't. And that's the key to the business plan. What do we have that others don't that we can offer? And then secondarily, who needs what it is we have? Let's go find out those people and talk with them and see if they want to come here. But that's a listing of the things that, again, that I'm out selling as we are doing this. And those runway weight limits are the key to it. We can bring in single aisle airliners, not full, not going to get service here 5 times a day, anything along those lines, but certainly in the long run, somebody's got to work, somebody's got to rehabilitate those planes, somebody's got to do the things that are needed for the future, and we're the place that has those workers. Quick review of all of the investment and the rehabilitation side, because that's key. We've been kind of going through that phase. Let's bring everything back up to where it needs to be now. So 2014, we did lateral joint repair. We began to pick up some pace. I have highlighted in bold, I think, the areas that I think key because the city invested here by themselves. So we did purchase land for overflow parking down south of the canal. We did the road realignment, did some repaving there once the water and sewer was done. We purchased the land on the west side. We've purchased the new AWAS. All of those things are being looked at, and everyone sees, again, we're doing what we say, and we're moving forward as we've indicated we wanted to. But in total, the majority of the rehabilitation costs have been paid for by ODOT and the FAA. One of the key things I think I want to make sure that you all understand is that we're beginning to transition the type of projects that we're going to be able to do as we move forward from that. So next steps and looking at funding priorities. The grant process is generally guided by the submission of the annual capital improvement plan, the CIP. It's a 10-year projection of what projects you see coming down the line. Grants are prioritized based on the points of emphasis coming from the FAA and ODOT, basically what's important to them. It may be safety, it might be pavement, it might be lighting, it depends on what the flavor of the day is, but we're always going to try and take advantage of that. Rehabilitation and maintenance are always the focus of ODOT. I have not seen that grow too much in the couple of years that I've worked with them, and the FAA generally is not responsive in my estimation, towards revenue generation projects. In our case, do we have the maintenance and the infrastructure taken care of before we would start talking about putting up new hangars and new buildings to generate revenues? Again, that's a business part of it, and that would be part of the sponsor's responsibility to kind of augment how that's done. One of the things I've learned here in the most recent period, since we've transitioned a couple of things out here recently, is the number of opportunities for revenue generation that we weren't taking advantage of. And that's, again, a key aspect that everyone's going to be looking at. If you want access to the asset, you really need to pay your way into that situation. A couple of next steps coming up. We have several large projects on the horizon, but again, it is the end of the rehabilitation, the redevelopment, and we're going to begin to transition to projects that are bringing new things on, and we're going to have our act together. So runway repavement is the next big one on the list. As soon as we submit and the ALP master plan is accepted, I think we would be in the running for that. It'll all come down to, do we have the operations to warrant keeping what we have? Again, I think we're in pretty good shape for that at this point, so we should be able to move forward with that. And then the second one is the lime pond remediation. That's something that's been hanging out there. We haven't spent a lot of time or effort on it because there's been a lot of background work going on, but it's going to come to a point where they're going to ask, what are we going to do with the lime pond? The water, the well department, water treatment is coming to the end of their life as far as usefulness of the pond, so they're on board with doing something about it, but we're going to have to make those moves. Once that is over with, again, we're going to begin to move forward with things. And right now is the time when the most number of activities are happening. I think in a couple of different areas we've stated that. In essence, the dominoes are beginning to fall. Okay. Remember where the light switch is. As that comes up. And in essence, things are happening right now. I only a couple of little points there, but in essence, how we use the land is going to be reviewed and looked at. Again, that goes to revenue generation and the impact of water and the well field. The airport and the well field are married. They're joined at the hip. We've got to work together. We have to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because as this thing moves forward, we're going to be affecting each other's ability to raise revenues, raise the standard of living that we're all looking for. So transitioning is happening, kind of going through there. You guys don't have...
We're ready for you.
Here we go. First time. Yeah. More practice coming in. All right.
Hey Matt, while that's rebooting, when do we anticipate addressing the lime pond?
As soon as water treatment is comfortable with the next iteration of the treatment process. We I'm talking out of my area of expertise, but we expel used lime into the pond. It's just a place to hold it. In essence, I believe water treatment is preferring to move to an enclosed system so that the lime does not get ejected. And so at that point, we're done with the pond itself. Once that decision is made, once the new system is up and running, the pond can go away.
Months or years?
I think it's years, but I don't think it's a lot of years.
Okay. Thank you.
But I don't want to get too far in front of us.
That's all right.
Either, because all right.
Thank you.
You want to catch up again?
And the lime pond was the project that we put in as a suggestion for the federal stimulus package, the $1 billion of transportation money. We're not qualified for this round. There's a whole lot of things that say we're not going to get any money out of this, but we submitted anyways. We did ask for the money for that. Again, I think that is on the priority list of the FAA. They ask about it in the meetings, but they understand we're a couple of years away from really getting to an answer. But we're there. I think we're very close to finally deciding the pathway. So then, progress to date and what we've done. From an economic development standpoint, I think we've done an awful lot. We've got a good plan. I think we understand the industry a lot more than we did before. We're still bringing additional information and consultants to the table. But we've certified the land. We're almost there. We're not actually technically certified at this point, but we're in that system. We're working through PACE financing and reviewing what opportunities that we may be able to utilize there. But for the development side, the Opportunity Zone program that's coming up here, I think is a great fit. The airport was the area that was picked for utilizing that. We've already got in place incentive programs, infrastructure resource programs, the TIF. We've come a long way with our education and workforce side. There's a couple of things listed there, but in the end, as you've heard me say, and I'm sure from others, that in today's world, it's not as much cash as you can throw at a project that's going to make a difference. It's the workforce support. That's what everybody wants to know. We can bring a company here, but how am I going to find the workers? And by setting up our pipeline for that opportunity, I think we've done an awful lot to sell what we have. We've also brought, again, experienced personnel, so understanding how airports work and some of the fine-tuning that we can do onto that operation. But in the end, I have the box there because I thought, in my mind, that's probably the best way to help you understand how I see the decisions before you here. Doug always talked about when he got on is the box. We got to work within the box. We need definition to the box. Well, that box is really where we're at. How are we moving forward? What is that box? And what does it look like from an outside perspective? And what I mean there is how are we utilizing our funds? The funding priorities, as far as an airport would be concerned, are the infrastructure projects, taxiways, ramps, buildings, hangars, things like that. And how we utilize the funds that hopefully you all make available to us out there is what's going to be looked at and is what's going to be building the relationships and the opportunities that we may be able to get from that. So I guess it's just key that I know you all are not going to be able to give me $20 million. You're not going to be able to give me $30 million. There's going to be a finite number, and it's probably going to be year by year. And we're going to do what we can with that money and spend it as wisely as possible. But what I want to make sure I help you understand that the way I see it is where are we putting that spending power? Are we putting it into things that are going to return value to the community? Are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck? The return on investment is that key thing. Or are we supporting, what's the best word for it? How are we supporting things out? So if we're subsidizing, I guess, if we're subsidizing operations out there, I don't think that's the best approach. It doesn't show the professional airport operation we got, and it's not the best use of the assets that we've got out there. So no matter who it is, no matter what it is, everybody out there needs to be able to pay their way through. The development projects we've talked about on the west side, the jobs, and I know a lot of people, there's no way you'll get 300 people working out there. It's just not going to happen. In the end, it will happen because we're doing the homework, we're moving this thing forward, and it's going to pay for itself. All of the things that are going to be needed are going to be taken into account. It's not a fly by the seat of your pants situation. We're going to be working on this relationship and building the possibility for this project for a number of months. And just like everything else that you would expect to come from an ED department project, we need to make sure that it's the best bang for our buck again. And that's, again, the key. I only have so many dollars coming from you to help support and develop the airport, and I want to make sure they go into the things that are going to return the most to the community and develop the asset for the longest term. So helping to put that box together, sorry I keep hitting that, is really what this is all about. So I appreciate that. That's all I had to say is really, again, how did we get here to where we are today, asking for these questions, and if there's any questions for me at this point, we're informal somewhat.
I have a couple.
Yes, ma'am.
How much did we pay for the airport when we bought it from Hogan? You know?
We have always owned the property. That is part of the FAA grant assurances, so we'll never, and that was one of the questions asked, could we sell? We could not. There are some ways, but we don't need to get into the weeds of that. So the transaction with the Hogans was to purchase the buildings only. Okay. And I believe that was at $1.8 million for all of the buildings that he had developed and put together as he was controlling the airport for his 20-some years. I'm going to guess at that number. So.
And so from that point on is when we started getting more of the federal funding. Is that the case?
I think
because we were able to work more completely? Or how did that shift?
I would say that the federal funding has always been available. I don't know what the projects were or are. I know only from moving forward from the day that I got involved that we had spent all of our money. We get an allocation every year. We can save it up for 4 years or we can spend it along the way, again, depending on what we're looking for through that 10-year plan. And so how that was utilized before my time, I don't know. I know I came on, and when I sat down and we did the grant review, we had some outstanding issues. We had a grant that was open 3-4 years. They wanted it closed. They want, you know, how your follow-up going. So I can't say anything about the past from that perspective, but again, I know we hit the wheelhouse is really what we've been doing. They wanted to emphasize safety for a couple of years, infrastructure, pavement, the new ODOT program. We could talk about how the state has revamped their system from less than $1 million for all 108 airports to now close to $25 million for all of the airports. That gets delegated out. We've gotten 4 of the largest grants from that new program in the last 3 years. 4th one coming up here, 4 out of the top 10, I think, grant size-wise. It's because we were prepared to utilize the funds. Never get any assistance from the state side. You're never going to be prepared with that match. We, again, fortunately had that infusion of capital dollars there, and we were able to do that. So I can only say that we were trying to hit right in the wheelhouse of what the FAA and the ODOT people were looking for.
Is there a general rule of thumb of how much the city is putting in versus other grants and funding? Is there a percentage that you can...
For all of the ODOT and FAA grants,
like wrapping it all
typically a 95.5 grant percentage at this point. It was 90-10 when I first got started. And again, ODOT and the state system has evolved. There was no money. There was nothing from ODOT at that point. So that was 90-10. Again, that system has continued to evolve now where the state is contributing 5% towards the local 10% match. That was one thing we were competing against in getting even contractors or businesses to come. I want to get too far into the weeds on that, but yeah, we were behind the 8 ball. The state and the feds, I think, have stepped up and put Ohio back on the map as far as aviation development.
And there is also an operational subsidy too, right? That we've kind of subsidized some of the operations at the airport over the years through just the general fund of about $100,000 a year too.
Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely. And I neglected to mention and acknowledge, thank you very much for that. It went from about 85 in 12 in the last 2 years, I believe. There's been a couple of supplementals and things like that, and all of that money is going towards the long-term maintenance. For the most part, if we have a spot that is being utilized, we want to support that, but we've, as much as we can, tried to push that forward with the dollars that have come locally. So I'm not even sure what that number is at this point, but yes, sir, I definitely appreciate that.
Question. Looking at the thing here with the education. You're hitting hard with education being a primary focus initially.
Yes, sir.
Out there at the airport. How is that going to pay any return on our investment from that standpoint of spending $10 million to build hangars to teach kids and people to work on airplanes if we don't have the business to generate that type of workforce? There's going to be a lag in time, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
So we're going to spend a ton of money up front in the hopes that having the workforce there to supplement it, it's going to bring in business to utilize it.
The education-focused hangar, I think, again, we're looking at those numbers right now, should, if we continue doing it the same way we're looking at doing this, should for the most part pay for itself. Hopefully there isn't a whole lot of subsidy coming in for that situation. So as we talked to Butler Tech, Cincinnati State, if we begin to approach a for-profit outside entity, an Embry-Riddle or one of those organizations about coming in, it's really the idea that we're going to put the hangar up that can be most self-sustained, but then that asset is at the airport. And again, from an economic development perspective, to be able to say that we're working with the city schools, we're working with our vocational schools and our higher education partners to create a pathway for workforce, to me, that's just number one right now. That is what everybody's looking for, is we're coming through. There's prospects on a weekly basis looking for property, want to know what the incentives are, need to know how much electric and water is available, those kind of things. But number one is, where's the workforce coming from? I think that in today's world, that's the key.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but as you were going through, I understood that somewhat differently than what Steve was saying. Mm-hmm. The education hangar, my understanding was that was being funded with the state money and some match, but the $10 million, and that was the first time I had heard that, I kind of assumed that would go for additional taxiways and for buildings for maintenance or manufacturing. That wouldn't all be education.
Correct.
This isn't an education airport.
Correct.
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 Correct. Again, our education partners will be making lease payments. They'll be leasing spots from us. And again, that's my job is to bring you something that you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I see how they're, PACE financing, we can spread out some of the opportunity zones. I was in Columbus this week, and it's powerful stuff that's coming. They're starting to get focused on that and how that's going to work. And so there's a lot of energy out there. And so again, my job is to bring you something. This is what's going to cost you. This is how many years we're going to finance it. Here's how they're going to make the payment on that each year, so that, again, we're not asking you for tons of money.
Two more questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So when we talk about return on investment, for the large part, that return is comprised of rentals, and then is there the fuel? Is that part of the ROI, or is that not calculated?
For the operation of the airport, the fuel flow, we would get a fuel flowage fee on top of that. That does go back to the operating revenues of the airport. There are a number of things that can be done that we're currently doing, some of them we're not. There are opportunities to look at ramp fees, landing fees, things like that. Really, again, if you want access to a particular asset in an airport environment, you should be paying something for that. And again, everything should be there. We've got a situation where we've gotten some operators, users out there, but they're gaining the advantage of having our nice airport without paying for it. They're not paying the things of year. And again, I think that's where knowing more about the aviation industry, about airport operations specifically, bringing in some veteran, experienced people to help with that's where it begins to lay out and makes a lot more sense. If we're going to go forward and maintain something, if we're going to keep the building up, we need to be just like any landlord, it needs to be priced right. And that's where we need to make the move from. We're getting the best dollar we can for these buildings, which we have not maintained properly, to get back to what can we offer at market rate. And if that means in a couple of situations where we have to go in and rehabilitate the Jets hangar, we're going to have to rehabilitate it to get anything out of that. That's further investment. It's got to make money sense. For new hangars, that business plan for that particular building has to be right there. I can't get people to come and have the interest that they do from an investment standpoint unless it makes sense. And I think that's where, again, we're getting traction in the private side. Some of the private partnerships that we began working on in 14 and 15. We talked to port authorities. We talked to other organizations. We've attracted some private investment potential. And so I think, again, it's got to make financial sense from that standpoint. So to answer your question, There are a number of fees that can go to the operational side. You land here, you pay a couple $100, you pay $25. I'm not sure what that is. We can get some fuel flowage fees. We can get the lease payments coming in. All of that should go towards that. And I think that's one of I guess the things I, again, have learned in the modeling of things. We can do it where your operator is making money off the buildings, and that way your overhead is very low. But if you're going to take over running an airport, you need to own the buildings, because then you can take 2 or 3% off of each one of those. That's what pays for your manager, pays for some of those things. That, I believe, identified from the Butler County study is where Butler County Airport's falling short. They don't own enough of the buildings themselves. They're only making money from the land leases. And so again, are you at market rate? Are you getting the most you can from it? Because you have to in order to make the model work.
Your idea of charging fees to land planes on the, is that a common theme throughout airports?
I believe so. Depending on the scope of what we're talking about, I wouldn't say that from a general aviation, historic, pardon that, but the gray hair pilots that want to come through for the $100 hamburgers, I don't think we're charging them a landing fee. But if this west side begins to build out and one of our large planes comes in, as we've talked about, I'm going to bring it in, I'm going to park it in a hangar somewhere, I have 100 people work on it for 3 months, retrofit it, do whatever it is they're going to do to that plane, when it landed and when it sits on the ramp, they're paying a fee. And I think that is normal. Yes, sir. Yep. And again, that's how those things get paid for.
That's the question. If we're making some type of decision in terms of functionality of the airport, are we looking at some kind of projections as to what we could expect to make?
Yes.
In fees, in the fuel, and in the rental, so that in year 3, 5, 10, what are we looking at projection-wise from a revenue standpoint?
Yep.
Do we have that kind of?
We are getting to that point. I think those are the pieces of information that we've gotten a hold of in the last couple of months. Again, bringing different people on board, and I'm going to go right to the new manager, his experiences, knowing how other airports work, how they're supposed to work, and how the business model works, and bringing that information is what we've needed. There's again a whole variety of things I just haven't been aware of. I'm kind of looking at it from this ED standpoint, but there's a lot of things that can be done for the operation side.
And some of these obviously depend on the direction we take from a policy perspective. We've maintained the general aviation side of things and the kind of the status quo versus moving more towards a corporate industrial type.
Correct.
Setup, things like that.
Correct.
Are there other revenue generation opportunities besides the ramp and access fees? I mean, you use that term broadly, but I mean, are there other revenue sources we'd be looking at the airport that you've come across? Or, I mean, I know this is kind of a high-level thing. Maybe that's getting down to the
I would, again, reviewing all of the opportunities is where I would want to get to. I can't tell you that there are 3 or 4 more that I haven't mentioned. I just can't do that. I don't know enough. But what I am discovering as we go through these situations and iterations of the activities, I'm learning more and more, certainly.
So when you talk about selling it, I don't need the names of companies, but what type of prospects? Are they all aviation-related businesses?
Absolutely. You have to have aviation use in order to get to the airport itself. There has to be an aviation use included, but that's where the market research goes in. We have a meeting tomorrow. We've hired an outside consultant to come in and help us with some aviation background. Also, several of the parties that we're working with are all wanting to sit at the table to talk about who it is we're going after. Because to me, that's coming in from a business standpoint. I want to know exactly who I'm going after. Rifle shot, not shotgun, those approaches. So in this case, my focus has been on that industrial side, MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul companies. And that's where we will focus tomorrow for about 2 hours, kind of going through those lists, deciding where we're going. So research into what's happening specifically in the general aviation industry, what's hot now, what's not as hot, what types of planes, what service areas. Let's look at, I know we talked about early on getting turbine service. We don't have a turbine service per se. I'm going to make sure I get the phrasing right. But for a specific type of plane, for a specific model of engine, there isn't anybody in this region. Let's go court those groups and see who wants to come here. So the plan is to go to the maintenance, repair, and overhaul show. Already having done our homework, just like we've done on retail for the last several years, I want to know who's going to have some projects coming up, who's looking at expanding into the Midwest, and that's who I want to sit down with to say, you should be coming to Middletown. Hopefully, as a maintenance, repair, and overhaul situation, they're going to be talking about workforce, and I'm going to say, let's come and visit, and let me show you the new education hangar. So if you're looking for workers, this might be some place that you want to have some ties to. And oh, by the way, while you're here, I got 100 acres over there that if you'd like to put a facility, let's get into those conversations. So no, we want to be very focused on who we're going after, and I think in that cluster for the most part. On the corporate commercial side, the southern side, where hangars already exist, I think there's certainly some opportunities there. As charter services, shared ownership, those kinds of things, bringing in a company that will probably tend to bring more people to town as a destination or a drop-off or take-off point. So,
Thank you.
Any other questions? We're a little long here in our time, but
Okay.
anything else, Mr. Eisenbraun?
that's all I have at this
thank you.
point.
Okay.
Nick?
And next up, we have Nick Brown. Nick is a member of the commission. We recruited him. It was one of the things that we have done, I think, over the last couple of years. Highly qualified people that can bring something to the table. Nick has over a decade of experience with Landrum Brown in airfield, airspace, terminal, and air cargo facility planning, and he's been involved in a variety of projects worldwide. He has worked on the master plans for several airports in this hemisphere, including Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, Kansas City International, Cleveland Burke Lakefront, Long Island MacArthur Airport, El Dorado International Airport in Bogota, and then he's got 3 or 4 more listed here that I will not be able to pronounce. One in Ecuador, one in London, Gatwick, I can do that one, one in Costa Rica. But several, he brings a lot of great experiences to the table. He's done system planning for system-wide planning, Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, the North Carolina Department of Aviation, and the Missouri Department of Aviation as well. He's done cargo planning for JFK Airport, Indianapolis International Airport, and again, a couple more that I cannot pronounce. He holds an FAA commercial pilot's license with instrument and seaplane ratings. He has a Bachelor of Science in Aviation Management from Purdue. And I think most importantly, he is a MIDI, was born here. He told me that he did some speaking here a number of years ago to the city council at that time as a student, so he had some warm feelings as he came back in tonight. But I will turn it over to Nick Brown to give you an idea of some of the current trends and opportunities within the general aviation community. Come on up. And general aviation.
All right, good evening, everybody, and thanks, Matt. We'll try and make up, I'll probably promise we'll make up a little time. So I'll try to be brief. But if there is any questions, some of the things I'll get into may end up being a little technical. Aviation is known for, if nothing else, alphabet soup. So if I start going off on a tangent and anything, stop me or ask a question, feel free. So I'm pretty used to that. So Matt did ask me to speak a little bit about the state of the general aviation industry as a whole, what's going on, what's happening throughout there, not just locally, but as aggregate, around the country and in the world as well. So I put together a couple of slides, and what that is general aviation really as a whole is still recovering from the Great Recession that started in 2007, 2008. You can see by the graph there, and the information here on this slide is from the FAA's national forecast, where they look out for the 20-year period every year and look at the aviation industry as a whole, not just for any one particular airport. And the FAA does use that then to compare, when an airport does a master plan and does a forecast, they'll look at this as a point of reference for when they're doing their review. But as a whole, you'll see that graph that is, in terms of total hours flown for general aviation, we're still below the mark we were as a country in 2008. We're almost caught up, but we're not quite. They are projecting, a total growth of about 2.7% over the next 20 years out to 2038. I will say that the majority of that growth, though, is not necessarily historically where general aviation has been in terms of your single-engine piston aircraft. And example of that is on the bottom left of your screen. Cessna 172, probably one of the most popular aircraft in the world for training and single-engine pilots. The vast majority of the growth that will occur that's projected is in your turbine fixed-wing aircraft, which are your business jets, your corporate aviation, your turbine turboprop type aircraft that are more predominantly used by the business aviation, by light cargo operators, not necessarily your $100 hamburger recreation pilots. So with that, a lot of that's spurring that again is your corporate, your business, but also the shared economy. We see that with Uber, we see that with Lyft. There's that same concept that goes through in aviation. You see that with Wheels Up, that you see on advertisements a lot during NFL games. That's another shared economy type on-demand. You pay for a membership. You have so many hours you can use, and when you need it, they show up and they take you where you want to go, and then off they go and do another flight. You don't own the aircraft, so that's that kind of that model that's really you're seeing a lot of that growth in. The other thing, risks. There are drivers that are also out there that might be a risk to the general aviation, the recreation type pilot. There's been a lot of talk in Congress for, well, it's not recent, but it's been a few decades. They've talked about air traffic control privatization, some model similar to what you see in Canada and other countries, whereas users of the system will pay a fee to use the system. There are arguments for and against, helping sustain the system. The airlines are all for privatizing or implementing user fees throughout the system to help offset the costs that they incur through passenger facility charges. That they would like to see general aviation pay their fair share, for lack of a better term. That in itself will has an effect. There's the argument of safety, and when you have those fees, the general aviation pilots who are far more sensitive to budgetary constraints, be it fuel or user fees, are much less likely to use the air traffic system. Therefore, fly by visual flight rules when it's marginal weather and so on. But that also has the effect of tampering down the use and the number of hours flown. So those are some of the risks that will likely incur and reduce the number of hours flown over time. That helps to depress that number. But again, when you get into your larger, more high-performance aircraft, that's much less likely to have an effect because they are using the system. And as somebody mentioned, landing fees and everything else. When you get to your larger business corporate type of aviation, those are the aircraft that are more receptive to paying that. They're less sensitive to it. In many places where, in my flying days when there were landing fees, somebody flying in, like myself in the aircraft on the bottom left, they're looking for where there's either no landing fee, or B, they'll waive it if you buy a few gallons of fuel. So there's ways to offset that. This slide really is looking at the aviation industry as a whole, and where things are and what they see happening over the next few years and what some of the needs are. But and the information here is from the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, which is a branch of the United Nations that oversees a lot of the regulations and standardization of aviation rules from one country to the next. So the ICAO projects over the next 20 years, 25,000 new aircraft to enter through all over the world. Through that, they're going to need there'll be a shortage of pilots and other aircraft professionals. 480,000 new technicians are going to be needed to work on the aviation fleet all over, and 350,000 new pilots are also going to be needed by 2026. So we're not even looking at 20 years.
Hey, Nick, since I don't have any historical context for that sounds like a lot. Is that a big need?
It is a big need. The biggest need is in the training sector. There are not enough, and that's what we're down here at the bottom. There's not enough training capacity out there today to fill that need, and that there also isn't enough access to affordable training. You have a lot of schools and universities that provide the training and via a 4-year degree, but there's that middle ground, and typically when folks come out of those type of programs, they're going to move into more of a management role within those facilities and those organizations. Whereas you still need the actual technicians that are doing the day-to-day operations, and they're going to be looking for more of a technical degree or more of a 2-year degree. And those types of programs have not caught up to the demand of the industry. And also, to give you a little bit of context, the need is further exacerbated by age-out requirements imposed by the FAA and other organizations. Several years ago, for example, historically the age-out requirement for an airline transport pilot, so the pilots that are up front and the airliners that you and I all fly all over the world, had always been 60 years of age. At 60 years, the pilot is required to is no longer eligible to fly commercially. They can still fly for a charter organization or a private corporate type structure, but for a full-fledged commercial scheduled airline, a Part 121 operation, they were not eligible to do that. The FAA, in their infinite wisdom, did see that, hey, we see a problem coming. We don't have all these pilots coming out through, because also at the time, the regional airlines were not paying very salaries. Many of the classmates I graduated with from Purdue who were going off and flying for the airlines, they went to work for corporate, or not corporate, but regional airlines such as American Eagle, Comair when it existed, and those size airlines. They would go and work for those airlines, and but right out of school, those airlines are typically centered and based in your large urban cities: New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, that feed into your larger hubs. Some of the most expensive cities in the world. Working for a job that pays barely minimum wage. Most of the guys I know lived on food stamps. A lot of them did not stay as pilots for very long because the lifestyle was awful. They had no pay, and they were on the road all the time. So the lack of the lack of working conditions for entry-level pilots, as well as combined with all the pilots starting to age out, really has exacerbated it. Now, the FAA did extend the age-out requirement from 60 to 65, but now all of a sudden you're seeing all these pilots turning 65. So you're having there is a massive pilot shortage. Myself, as being a pilot who has not been in the cockpit for 10 years, for example, I get flyers in the mail every now and again recruiting me, trying to come back and fly, and offering signing bonuses and everything, and salaries that were unimaginable 12 years ago. So you're seeing a lot of that. So the combination of the lack of training capacity and the varying levels of training that are needed all over, combined with the affordability that really exacerbates that and makes that difficult to achieve. So does that offer a little bit of context for you? So with that, with those needs and where the aviation industry is going as a whole, what type of facilities are needed at airports, and what's going to offer you the most flexibility? On the left here, we've got your traditional T hangars. These types of buildings, you lease out a T hangar for one aircraft. It's typically rented out by your private aircraft owner, whoever might have a single engine or a small twin engine aircraft. And they're usually sawtoothed together like that, and you'll have a row of 10 or 15 at an airport, and you might have a few rows. Corporate hangars, and I'm just trying to give a little context here. Corporate hangars, these are your larger box hangars that are basically a big square, very common size is 100 by 100 hangar, and you can, it would be leased out to a company or an organization that might have one large aircraft or a couple smaller mid-sized jets that they would put in there, have an office next to it for their flight department, and some other small supporting facilities. Community hangars, very similar to the box hangars, however, they're more meant for an FBO to run or lease, or an airport operator that might offer to a group of pilots that needs a less expensive option to house their aircraft. They may not have more T hangars available, but hey, we can offer you a spot in our community hangar. You just got to give us 6 hours notice to be able to get your hangar or your aircraft out if it happens to be the one in the back, because they're typically puzzle pieced in, and there's a way that one in the back might require you to move 6 to get it out. So it's a little bit less access, but it's also a more economical solution at times. And then you have your maintenance hangars, which again are a large open hangar that you can put multiple aircraft in and do various types of work. Now, there are different types of those hangars depending on the type of maintenance activity that's happening there. You have everything from light maintenance, where you're just supporting operations and maintenance that's happening out on the ramp as an aircraft comes in and needs to go back out quickly. Simple fixes. Everything to a completely engine overhaul, which is a very major operation and requires a much heavier, substantial facility, or a paint shop, which is very, very specific and requires a lot more in terms of air filtration and hazardous materials, substances, and mitigating those types of things. So there's various different types of facility that you might have. Now, given the market and what's out there, you don't see a lot of airports the size of Middletown and the location of Middletown that are needing a lot more T hangars. Unless you've got, there are a few out there that are closer into major metropolitan areas. I know there's quite a bit of a waiting list down at Lunken because you've got the center of population with the center of aircraft owners that are wanting to be close and have their aircraft nearby. So therefore, there's that demand. But when you get further out into the suburban market, it becomes a little harder, and the market and the drivers are less for facilities such as your T hangars. But if you go and develop facilities such as your corporate hangars, your community hangars, and maintenance hangars, those the actual type of building themselves offers a degree of flexibility that could be used for any types, many different types of operation at the airport. Be it education, be it an MRO or a maintenance base, be it a new FBO or an operator that comes in and wants to offer a storage solution along with a pilot's lounge and a small terminal type facility attached to it. There's a lot of different options and flexibilities that facilities like those would offer versus developing more T hangars and supporting a recreation type environment that, frankly, based on forecasts and everything else, is a shrinking segment of the demand that you'll see at the airport. Any questions whatsoever?
I just had I'm sorry, just quick. Thanks for coming up, by the way, Nick. I assume you work with I heard CVG, so obviously you work with large airports. I assume you work with airports of similar size or have experience with municipal airports like Middletown?
Our firm has, yes. Primarily, though, we are a large hub, commercial aviation airports. So I do have some. Many times what we'll do is when we're working for a city or a municipality or a state that is an operator of a larger hub, but they also have a smaller reliever hub. An example is Cleveland. We'll do a lot of work for Hopkins, but also they have Cleveland Burke Lakefront that we'll also do work for as well.
Similar sized airports that are doing well and are recruiting well that are not in major metropolitan areas, what are they doing and doing well that is
They have a plan. You have a plan in place. Without that plan and without having a master plan and approved and being bought into not only by the FAA for funding reasons for infrastructure, but also by the local authorities. When you have the local authorities on board and you have a documented plan and a strategy that you're going after, that enables success. Without that, you're flag flapping in the breeze. Again, it's more of the shotgun approach versus the rifle approach, as Matt mentioned. So the biggest thing is having that plan, having the local buy-in, and enabling the atmosphere for things to occur. And there are a lot of things that you can do when you have an airport with diverse users. The best thing you can do is have let everyone know that might be coming in what's happening at the airport, but consistency with the operation. And allowing, knowing so somebody who's never flown in here before is coming in, flying for the first time, but if it's published that, hey, there's this type of operation happening at this part of the airport, as long as they know it's happening over here and I'm going into this part of the airport and it's happening over there, they're far less hesitant to use the airfield or to look for alternatives than coming in somewhere where you're not really sure what you're going to get. If you're flying into the Wild Wild West, people can be a little more hesitant to use the facility. But the biggest thing, successful airports have a plan and they work towards that plan.
Thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Brown on this one? Okay.
Thank you.
We're a little behind on our time, so I'll ask you, we can take a break for 10 minutes and let everybody stretch, or we can go ahead with John and then take a break, and I'll let you guys, however you decide.
Take a break. Take a brief break, say about 10 minutes.
Yeah, come back at 6:50 and we'll get started.
He was giving me the stink eye.
I appreciated your time. Very simply how airports grow, and we talked about all this, I'm telling you. You bring corporate business into your town, it will not grow. That is it. It's as simple as that.
Oh, there we go. Okay, we're on. Okay, all right. We're gonna come back to order. So if I could ask everyone to take your seats.
Oh, that's interesting.
We're reconvening our work session here on Thursday, November 15, 2018. So on our airport updates and discussions, and Mr. Atkins, next up is John Hart with.
John, are you presenting, or do you have
Okay.
John and John?
John and John. Okay.
I'm John Hart. That's John Hart.
Okay.
Not to be confused. I went ahead and I printed these off because I didn't know if it would get up on here also, and it actually ended up being a good idea in case the power goes out again.
We didn't know either.
But yeah, so if anyone would like a copy, you're more than welcome to. I have that extra.
Got it, so.
Okay, great. Well, good evening. Again, my name is John Hart. I am one of the owners of Start Skydiving, along with Gene Newsom and my father. I'm also the designated, sorry? Oh, well, and Alex. I'm also the designated United States Parachute Association Safety and Training Advisor for Start Skydiving. Now, we've seen some of the pros and cons of general aviation and corporate aviation at the Middletown Regional Airport. And now we're going to take a look at how Start Skydiving affects not just Middletown's airport, but the entire community. So first, let me start off by saying that ever since we came to Middletown, we've loved and embraced our community, and we are committed to continuing to do so. We want to continue to see new businesses opening their doors on the streets of Middletown and see the current businesses flourish. And ultimately, we want to see the entire city prosper and thrive. Now, let's see how Start Skydiving has helped Middletown achieve these goals. At the Middletown Regional Airport, Start Skydiving is the single largest tenant. Every year, we perform more takeoffs and landings at this airport than any other single person or business. We also fly more passengers at this airport than any other single person or business every year. Other tenants even talk about how the airport used to be dead and there was hardly any activity, and how nice it is and how great it is to finally see some life coming back to the Middletown Airport. Because we fly so often with so many people every year, we are also the airport's largest purchaser of fuel. And as anyone in aviation will tell you, flying planes this often requires a lot of maintenance. As such, we've become one of the largest customers of the on-site aircraft maintenance shop, Safe Skies, which is another large airport tenant, by providing Kurt Yearout and his team with nearly $150,000 worth of business every year. Now, why do we fly so often? Well, simply because we're the #1 rated skydiving center in the world. So we have people that come from all over the world. That means other countries, just to come skydive with us here in Middletown. Now, there are thousands more that return every year to Middletown because of the awesome experience that they had with us. And so every year in the spring, we see signs at these local businesses that say, "Welcome back, skydivers." I mean, how cool is that? We feel special when we see those signs. So many of these visitors travel, though, from up to 300 miles away, and they can stay with us some people stay with us for a month or even a few months. But most people, they just come in for the day, and then they head back home. Now, we also have a large base of regular skydivers, I would say about 300 or so, that come out on a weekly basis. And a lot of these people come from other states, such as Indiana and Kentucky, and Michigan as well. Many of our staff members have even made the ultimate commitment of completely relocating and residing in Middletown. And some of these are even from other countries, and they're here in this room right now. So not only do these people move to Middletown to work with us, but they bring their families with them. What other businesses bring this many people to Middletown? Start Skydiving is also home to Team Fast Tracks, the world's largest professional skydiving team. We perform demonstration skydives across the country and across the world. We have over 300 performances booked this year alone. These performances are conducted live in front of millions of spectators and millions more on national television. We have routinely become a recognized name at these sporting events and on national television as well. At these performances, Team Fast Tracks builds interest in Middletown. And the way that we do this is through our promotional materials that we hand out that cites Middletown proudly as our home. And we hand these out at airports that we fly into when we go to perform at these events. And so we've even come across people that have learned to fly here, just randomly out in the country. And so it's just good to see that people are recognizing Middletown outside of this airport. So now, having a lot of visitors is great, but how do these people actually benefit Middletown? Well, according to the Middletown Visitors Bureau, each out-of-town Start Skydiving visitor spends over $100 per visit in Middletown outside of Start Skydiving. This is not including what they spend on location. This is outside. This includes things like dining at the Spinning Fork, or having a beer at Bourbon's Kitchen to celebrate their skydive, or topping off their car at Davies on their way back home. Now, visitors that come from places as far as Chicago, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Nashville, which occurs on a weekly basis, they typically end up staying at a local hotel for the night, such as the Hampton Inn, before heading back home. And on average, these overnight visitors end up spending over $300 per visit. And again, that's outside of what they spend at Start Skydiving. This means millions of dollars are spent every year in Middletown by visitors to Start Skydiving. And again, this is in addition to what is being spent at Start Skydiving alone. In addition, our staff members themselves, especially the ones that end up relocating in Middletown, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year in Middletown. This just shows what our visitors contribute to Middletown. Now let's take a look at what Start Skydiving contributes. In addition to these millions of dollars that Start Skydiving visitors spend in Middletown every year, Start Skydiving and Team Fast Tracks have donated hundreds of thousands of dollars in man-hours to the local Middletown community. This takes the form of charitable donations, volunteer community service projects such as trash cleanup, and at-risk youth outreach programs. We also perform free demonstration skydives for performances across the city. And we provide free skydives for terminally ill, paraplegics, quadriplegics, amputees, Purple Heart recipients, and Gold Star family members. That's just the standard rate. We put that on our website. It's free for these people. Team Fast Track's official sponsor, Selection.com, also puts nearly $50,000 into the Ohio Challenge Hot Air Balloon Festival every year. What other company shows this type of commitment to the Middletown community? Now, we've seen how Start Skydiving has been a huge proponent of Middletown. Let's take a look at some of the opportunities that could and can still be used to become an even larger beneficiary to the city. Earlier this year, Start Skydiving had an amazing opportunity to perform government contract work for the Department of Defense. This contract would have brought 675 military trainees over a 9-month period, resulting in 23,000 hotel bookings and millions of dollars in revenue for Middletown. This contract would have doubled our business in every way, from the amount of staffing, aircraft, to our takeoffs, landings, and fuel purchases, to the maintenance performed by Safe Skies. And keep in mind, this could be right now, not might, as what I feel like I kind of received from the other presentations. This is stuff that we know we can do, right? So in order to receive this contract, though, we needed more space for all of this growth. And as such, we offered $250,000 to renovate the 1701 quote-unquote Jets hangar, just because it has the name Jets on the outside of it. Pay the utilities, match the existing tenant's rent, pay the property taxes, and allow the sheriff helicopters to remain to support the military airborne training operations. This deal really was a no-brainer. However, our proposal was denied, and the reason that we were given was simply that it's not the direction that the city wants to go with that space. Instead, the space that we had requested was given freely to a non-aeronautical activity that could have been located elsewhere, and a school that, while still valuable, provides minimal economic benefits to Middletown. Due to the denial of the necessary space, we were unable to accept the DoD contract, and now we must wait 3 years before the contract comes back up for bid. Our question is, why would anyone do this when we could have placed these activities elsewhere, and millions of dollars could have been brought into the city and its residents by having an aeronautical activity based out of that hangar? So far, we've shown how much start skydiving benefits Middletown and how much more we could have done and can still do. Because these contracts come up and we can find more, right? And so we just need the opportunity. Now let's address the matter of having to make a choice between skydiving and tourism / recreation, or business / corporate development / jobs. On this meeting's agenda, as you'll see, it says that skydiving and / tourism is listed as status quo. To me, that almost seems like no growth. In fact, it's listed as a jack of all trades, a master of none. Least amount of expenditures, oversight, and opportunities. Now, there are a few things I'd like to discuss about this seemingly divisive decision. First of all, tourism equals business, and our business is skydiving. We create jobs, we bring people and their money to Middletown, which in turn creates more businesses, more jobs, more revenue, and more spending. This is a cycle that continues to benefit everyone in Middletown. Secondly, why can't we strive to be a master of more than one area? Striving to be a master of multiple areas will only provide more opportunities, not fewer. This is how businesses grow, and this is how prosperity flourishes. We believe skydiving tourism can not only coexist with businesses and corporate development, but actually thrive alongside one another. On that note, let's talk about our experience with corporate traffic at the Middletown Airport. In Start Aviation's experience as an FBO, and Team Fast Track's experiences with hundreds of FBOs across the country, when it comes to corporate aircraft choosing where to fly into, we found that they don't choose their destinations based on the other types of aviation that are occurring at the airport, because all pilots are trained to see and avoid other aircraft anyways. Nor do they really even seem to care about fuel prices really all that much. These million and billion-dollar corporations own and fly these jets for two reasons: speed and convenience. They typically fly into the airport that's closest to their ultimate destination, and it is most convenient for their passengers to get there. But simply, they fly where they're told to fly. We have found that the reason that most corporate aircraft are not attracted to Middletown is for two main reasons. Firstly, there are very few corporations in Middletown that are even large enough to justify having a jet that could fly in and out of Middletown. AK Steel was the only one that I could think of, and they ended up moving their jet to Butler County Airport before we even moved in. In fact, they even considered coming back at one point recently, knowing that Start Skydiving is located here and has been here. In fact, Team Fast Track supports AK Steel's fundraisers and employee appreciation days. We have actually formed a great relationship with this local business and continue to encourage their involvement with Middletown's airport. Secondly, the distance from the highway makes it difficult to justify flying into Middletown when there are options that are just closer to their desired destinations and easier to get to the highway. We've flown into airports out in the middle of nowhere, and these airports have had amazing facilities. When we've asked them why they have these beautiful facilities at an airport in the middle of nowhere with nothing going on, the FBOs have always told us the same story. That the local government, whether it be the city or the county, thought it would be something great to help bring in more corporate traffic. Instead, these facilities that we were seeing were being rented for birthday parties and graduations. This is not to say that we wouldn't like to see an increase in corporate traffic, because we certainly would. In fact, we believe and we know that our operations can safely coexist and thrive alongside corporate traffic. And the FAA even states this in its advisory circular regarding skydiving. An advisory circular, for those that don't know, is just a documentation that the FAA puts out that states good guidelines and best practices, recommendations for handling types of aviation. So the one for skydiving states that, that a large number of airports that accommodate parachute operations also have many different kinds of aviation activities taking place simultaneously. The FAA further states that many airports accommodate a large volume of transient traffic during skydiving operations. In fact, visiting aircraft comment on how easy it is to fly into Middletown. And they tell us how much they appreciate the constant status updates from our pilots during our operations. In addition, each of our skydivers are trained and briefed on safety procedures to help prevent any possible traffic conflict. These procedures include things like avoiding crossing the runway below 1,000 feet, avoiding approaching the ends of the runway below 2,000 feet. We also train our skydivers that when they're going to cross a runway on foot to always look both ways twice before they cross, on the ground and in the air. And if they do see an aircraft about to take off or land, they're actually instructed to go back 50 feet away from the runway and take a knee to let the pilot know that they're not about to dart across the runway, and they just have to wait until the airplane passes. And now that those procedures are in place, let me tell you that as Start Skydiving's safety and training advisor, I can assure you that we're vigilant when it comes to monitoring our safety, the safety of our operations. And the violations of these procedures are taken extremely seriously. For more than 12 years, Start Skydiving has safely operated and coexisted with other aeronautical activities without any incidents or conflict. These other activities include flight school students learning how to fly both planes and helicopters, remote-controlled aircraft, and drones being flown over the airport during skydiving operations without incident. Emergency medical evacuation and law enforcement helicopter services that could go on call at any moment, and no conflicts. Commercial and recreational hot air ballooning. They can't even control where they go, and we had no conflicts. Gliders, paramotors, and ultralight aircraft. Aerobatic aircraft training over top of the airport. And freighter and passenger jets of many various purposes and sizes that are landing and taking off during our operations. Recreational general aviation of various aircraft also occurs, some of which don't even have radios, and some of which land on the grass strip runway right next to where all of our students land, and again, without any conflict. Our safe operation procedures have resulted in the FAA using Start Skydiving as an example of how a skydiving center should operate. They've actually come out to the airport and to train their people and say, this is what you should be looking for when it comes to a skydiving operation. This track record, along with hundreds of skydives performed by Team Fast Tracks across the country every year, has resulted in a great working relationship with the local flight safety district offices, air traffic controllers, and FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C. As you can see, skydiving operations can safely be conducted simultaneously with these other activities. There's not need to be a decision between one activity or another. This being said, some may wonder if skydiving is even considered an aeronautical activity. Well, according to the FAA, the answer is a definite yes. Skydiving/parachuting is considered an official aeronautical activity and is recognized as such by the FAA. As an official FAA-recognized aeronautical activity, federal regulations require airports that receive federal funding to accommodate skydiving unless the FAA determines that there are compatibility issues that prohibit safe operations. And even then, the FAA would favor the activity that was already present, not the incoming activity. This regulation can be found in the Airport Improvement Program Compliance Manual, and I provided it on this slide here for you. And this slide says, the owner or operator of any airport that has been developed or improved with federal grant assistance is required to operate the airport and make it available for the use and benefit of the general public on reasonable terms and without unjust discrimination to all types, kinds, and classes of aeronautical activities, including commercial aeronautical activities offering services to the public at the airport, and without granting an exclusive right. You can think of Star Skydiving as your own personal bald eagle that has nested here in Middletown. These regulations are in place, though, not to just protect skydiving, but to protect all forms of aeronautical activities, which we welcome wholeheartedly at the airport, even during our operations. So how can these multiple different aeronautical activities operate simultaneously without incident? Well, the answer is very simple, actually, and it's communication. So as far as communication is concerned, the advisory circular, the same one that I had just referred to, recommends that shared facility airports have operating procedures so that each activity can operate safely by knowing the procedures for each of the other activities. Representatives of each activity can operate more effectively by knowing the procedures for the others. Representatives of each type of airport user group should develop these procedures and specific to their activity and share these procedures with other user groups. It is then the airport management's responsibility to ensure that the airport policies and procedures are kept current. This can be accomplished by just having meetings that are regularly scheduled and in which all of the group members can be participants. In summary, skydiving can safely coexist with other activities as long as three things occur. And in the aviation industry, we love our acronyms, so I decided to make one up. So PPC stands for Planning, Procedure, Implementation, and Execution, and Communication. These are the three things that are necessary. We need to have plans in place, have procedures, but it's great to have these plans and procedures, but we need to follow them. And then lastly, we need to share these plans and procedures with one another via effective communication. Doing this, we can provide a safe environment for all forms of aeronautical activities. And lastly here, we have no plans on ever moving. Start Skydiving is here to stay for the long haul because we love Middletown and we're committed to its community. This is why we signed the 20-year lease 10 years ago. We want the opportunity to continue to grow, bring in more visitors, and generate more prosperity for the people of Middletown. To do this, we need to be provided with the ability to expand upon our current business and its facilities. Why not strive to be a master of more than one? Thank you for your time and consideration, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Now, does anyone have any questions about anything I've said or maybe anything I didn't say?
Any question, Mr. Hart?
Just one, Mr. For me, with Start Skydiving's analysis of the current layout of the airport and then with the master plan, what changes might come, does Start Skydiving have any recommendations on the layout or the needs, or how do one interplay with the
yeah, we would discuss this once with one another in addition to the talks that we actually had during the layout plan, because I remember this meeting, it was like 4 years ago, I think, but when we sat down, we talked about it, and I wish I had the drawing that Matt had up on the board, but if you, I don't know if you printed it off for everyone, or anyways, you guys can take a look at it later, but if you notice, Start Skydiving actually doesn't move. We're still located in that same area that we're currently located on the layout plan. And the only thing that's up on the north side is where we were planning on putting our swoop pond, so we can hold international competitions where we bring in people from other countries and they compete in canopy, parachute piloting. And so that's where we had planned to put that. And so, that's been a long time coming, trying to get that going. But as far as our location, we don't really want to move from where we are on the airport, just because we put time and effort and money into where we are currently at, and we believe that any future money would be better off spent improving the current facilities that we have, as opposed to having to be relocated and build a whole new facility. Now, that being the case, we're not too opposed to the other option either, if that, that's what it comes down to. It's just a matter of communication and whatnot. Really, I don't know if my dad has anything further to say on that.
And then just as far as the operations, do you foresee that anything changing along those lines?
Oh, honestly,
where the parachutists drop, or
No. So as far as skydiving is concerned, when skydivers come out of the airplane, we get out no further than like a mile away. It depends on the upper winds, and if the winds are strong enough to where we have to get out further than a mile, then we're not jumping anyways. But so we try to we're opening up around a mile radius of the airport, and typically it's right over top. However, our minimum deployment altitudes is 2,000 feet. And most people actually end up deploying, and they should end up deploying, higher than 3,000 feet. And so really, the airplanes, when they're coming in to land, obviously they're feet above the ground. And now, as far as their patterns go, they're way, way out at those altitudes. They're farther than we would ever be, or should ever be, for that matter. Now, of course, whenever we're performing our operations, our pilots always announce when there's jumpers out, but also they announce minutes. Like we have a 5-minute call, and then we also have a 2-minute announcement, and then we have the actual announcement of the actual jumping operations. And so we have plenty of procedures in place that help work with other people, and we've never had any issues or complaints from from any other users of the airport. So I don't foresee any issues ever occurring. Now, again, this comes down to having plans in place, but also having procedures, and then just talking about it with the other people that are planning on using the airport. And like I said, I'd love to see more corporate traffic coming into Middletown, but I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, just based on my experiences, of what I've seen. Regardless, we can work well with it if it does occur. Because, like I said, I would love to see that happen, because we're all about seeing Middletown thrive, man. So.
Anything else, Mr. Hart? All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Coming down.
Matt, do you want to introduce Maria? It's another casualty of our ice storm. We've got our last presenter couldn't get it through the ice from, I think, Indiana?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have on the phone with us Maria Muya, who is a great asset for us. I've known her for a couple of years. She was introduced to us after a contact we had made with Jobs Ohio's Dayton office. Remember some of the ancillary things that happened a number of years ago, but we had a relationship with Dayton. They have an aviation aerospace focus because of Wright Pat and some of the other activities up there. So when we invited them to come down and help us assess where we wanted to go with the airport, what the opportunities were, that was one of the things they recommended, is that we connect with Maria. Maria was the former director of aeronautics for the state of Indiana Department of Transportation. She brings 28 years of aviation experience, including public and private opportunities. She's a private pilot with over 1,000 hours, and she brings a unique blend of knowledge about user needs, airport facility requirements, and project funding and implementation. She's been formerly the administrator and enforcer of the government's aviation rules. She was on the other side, and she's come to the good side now. As an aviation consultant, she has led airport master plans, airport layout plans, aviation forecasts, environmental assessments, and various research projects. Her major accomplishments in the private sector include authoring ACRP, those circular advisories. She's authored a number of those. She's led the update of the Indiana State Aviation System, the entire SATE plan, and she's updated the Purdue University Airport Master Plan, including 2 runway extensions. And runway extensions something I started talking about 4 or 5 years ago, they still haven't stopped laughing because runway extensions are very hard to do, so we give her a lot of credit there. And then she has also served as the interim airport manager for the Indianapolis Executive Airport and the Purdue University Airport, so she brings a fair amount of opportunity experience to us. So with that, Maria, are you on the line?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I believe we can.
Very good. I appreciate your ability and willingness to accommodate me via the teleconference based on this inclement weather. I know you've been having a little bit of issues because I'm following you live stream right now, and you've gone off and on a couple of times on me. So I know you feel my pain right now. Having spent time flying myself both fixed wing and rotorcraft, I have a pretty good understanding of the pilot's perspective, I think. I've also, as Matt indicated, managed a couple airports, so I have a pretty good knowledge of the airport safety side of things. Now, I have to admit, I've never jumped out of an airplane, so that's mostly because I think my father forbade me from jumping out of a perfectly really good airplane, but I do feel like I have a good general understanding of the activity as it relates to airports like Middletown. So I've been asked to talk about the natural conflicts that can happen between different types of general aviation. And there are some natural conflicts. Some aviation activities, when they're operated within close proximity to other aviation activities, can actually compromise the safety of aircraft or property or aviators. And it's for this reason that the FAA has provided guidance on these things, and I think Mr. Hart talked a little bit about that in his 3 items of planning, procedure, and communication. One of the things that the FAA encourages for airports to have rules and regulations and minimum standards for commercial operations. The other thing that the FAA does is they provide guidance on airport planning to people like me, because that's what I am. I'm an airport planner. And one of the things that we're asked to do whenever possible is to separate different size aircraft. And this includes separating corporate jets from light propeller powered aircraft. And we do this often to minimize the effects of jet blast and to accommodate different visibilities from different cockpits, et cetera. But we'll also do this in practice to try to separate different types of aircraft from skydiving. And this is really no different than what you see in the road system. I mean, we do this every day. We look to, when it's possible, to separate our walking pedestrians with sidewalks from the roads. We look to separate our bikes with bike paths from the cars if we can. So this is all just normal, good, standard practice when it's possible to do it. And I believe, as Mr. Hart had indicated, that it is the pilot's responsibility to see and avoid. That's an FAA regulation. The pilot in command, what we call the PIC, has to see and avoid everything in the sky. And again, Mr. Hart identified many of these different types of activities happening around Middletown. The PIC has to avoid all of these, everything else in the sky. Birds, balloons, gliders, thunderstorms, other aircraft, and yes, people falling from the sky that we call our skydivers. When an airplane encounters any of these in an unintended encounter, obviously that doesn't turn out usually very well. It is the aircraft that has more maneuverability, and it is the pilot's responsibility to see and avoid. So the FAA tries to help us with this. They produce an airport facility directory, and Matt, I think if you can flip me to my next slide. Actually, I need the slide that says Ohio on the top with the airport facility directory entry. It's up now. You are on a brief delay, so Matt's on top of it. Yeah, fantastic, thank you. So the the FAA produces an airport facility directory, and that's the directory that a pilot looks at when operating in an airport, pre-planning their flight. And one of the things that the FAA will do, if there's a significant amount of skydiving activity, they will actually put in the AFD, and I have it highlighted there, extensive skydiving activity. Now, to actually get included in that entry, you only need 4,000 drops, and I think Start Aviation has been so successful at their business that they're somewhere near the neighborhood of 50,000, I think, drops. The next thing, if you give me the next slide, Matt, the other thing that they do is on the aeronautical start, they'll put a parachute next to your airport. That's the start that the pilot is also looking at when flying into the airport. Now, recreational activity like skydiving or gliding, all of this can coexist with corporate aviation, just as Mr. Hart has indicated. But it is also the case that as traffic increases, whether it's the corporate or the skydiving or gliders or whatever the activity is, so does the risk of an inadvertent encounter. Now, when the traffic becomes too high and the risk too high, then corporate traffic will avoid the activity. Remember, it is the pilot's responsibility to avoid, right? See and avoid. So when the risk is that they feel too high to mitigate, then they will try to avoid it. Give me the next slide, Matt. FAA provides guidelines on the size of a drop zone, and their guidance when it's on an airport is approximately about 340,000 square feet. That equates to about 8 acres. I think when you use RAM air canopies, and then with the larger round canopies that are less maneuverable, I don't know that START uses any of those, but that size increases to about 70 acres. Now, most drop zones around the country, basically, they're trying to segregate the landing areas for the parachutists from the runway complex. And so they often place the drop zones on one side of the airport, and then the aircraft, base aircraft and everything on the other side of the airport. So there's just sort of this natural segregation. And when it comes to safely trying to accommodate, all these uses on the airport, including the skydiving, you really need to seek to establish a drop zone that is consistent with FAA design standards. Matt, you can give me the next slide. And FAA design standards tell us that if it is all possible, you don't want to locate a drop zone on a runway or a taxiway, or any of the runway safety areas or object-free areas, and you want to be, if you can, 40 feet away from any hazard. Now, the slide you've got up there now is Start Aviation established drop zone at Middletown, and it covers, as you can see, the vast majority of the airport. It's over 200 acres right now. It's on both sides of the primary runway, the hard surface runway. It actually does include the surf runway. It includes the area between the runway and the taxiway, and it even includes the area between the taxiway and the ramp. So the pilots, or the parachutes are really dropping on a large majority of the airport. If you give me the next slide, Matt, you can see what it looks like from the pilot's perspective what these drop zones look at. Now, if I'm correct, I think that Start Aviation drops folks from 13,000 feet is the highest they go. I think there's 6,500 and 13,000. So basically, these polygons can reach clear up to 10,000 feet in the air. And if these zones are constantly operational, a corporate pilot really is not going to actively pursue flying into these airports. Now, with Start Aviation located on the southeast side of the runway, and the major drop zone, as you can see there, on the northwest side of the runway, parachutists have to commonly cross the runways, the taxiways, and the ramps. And this just really is not an ideal situation, especially as Mr. Hart indicated, with 7,000, once a year operators, jumpers who do not really have much experience being on an airport. And in most all airports, we seek to not have anybody walking on the runways or across the runways, if at all possible. Bad things can happen as activities increase. Jumpers can get by aircraft can hit jumpers, propellers, jet blast. All these things are just not the greatest environment if you don't have to have it. Now, the ideal situation from an airport planning perspective, because that's what I am, I'm an airport planner, is to segregate these activities. I'd like to see the skydiving operation move to the northwest side of the airport, and I would like to see it pulled back off of the setbacks for the runway safety area and the runway object free area, because that is the safest situation in which to create an environment that everybody works well with, and allowing expansion on corporate side and then expansion on the skydiving side and all the growth that they would like to see with the military training for parachutists. All these things, all this growth that you're talking about, whether it be corporate or education or Department of Defense, this all increases activity. And so when activity increases, the chance for, an accident increases. So we look to mitigate that to the best degree possible. And the best situation for any skydiving situation is to have their own area of the airport. And that's why I would propose moving them to that side. Now, this could obviously impact your turf runway that you see on there. Right now, the skydiving actually lands on the turf runway that's included as part of the drop zone. And that turf runway is basically FAA guidelines look for you to have what we call 95% wind coverage. And basically that means can you land 95% of the time based on the winds, and you're trying to land into the wind. So can you do that with the orientation? I've looked at quick analysis of the last 10 years of winds, and your primary runway, the hard surface one, is providing, I think, just over 97%. So from an FAA guideline standpoint, you really don't need that third runway. I know I'm sure there's people there that would disagree and that they want it, but as far as in practice, how often it's used, it's probably not used there very much. And so moving the skydiving over to that area may impact that runway, but I don't really know that would be something that wouldn't be insurmountable. So that's basically my presentation and my recommendation. I'm happy to take any questions, and if you don't get them to me tonight, if you want to talk to me at another point, and I'll give you my phone number or my email, but I'm happy to answer anything you've got. So I'll give it back to you guys.
Any initial questions for Maria from council? Maybe hard to relay that over the phone, but.
I had a question. Is there a graph that shows what your recommended drop zones would be? I don't know if we could see that graphically, sort of like what we're seeing with the current drop zones. What would your recommended drop zones be?
So we haven't got to that point yet. Obviously, it would be on the northwest side, and that would be something that I would not want to arbitrarily recommend without having some consultation with Start Aviation, because they're the ones that are doing it and living it on a daily basis. But I do think that it could be accommodated on that northwest side somewhere.
Maria, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Mr. Hart cited the Airport and Airway Improvement Act of 1982, and it talks about grant assurances. And one of the sections I'm concerned about says, general public on reasonable terms and without unjust discrimination to all types, kinds, and classes of aeronautical activities, et cetera, they have right to the airport. If they were to move and didn't want to move, if they were still permitted on the airport, would that be considered, given your background, unjust discrimination?
No, I don't believe that would be considered unjust discrimination. I think that would be safety mitigation. I think that the FAA, I believe Mr. Hart indicated that it would be the FAA's determination of whether something was safe or not. He indicated that they would look to the original user as having preference, and I don't necessarily believe that's the case. The FAA looks at everything in relation to safety. Safety first, safety first, safety first. And if we can create a safer environment where parachutists are not crossing active runways and taxiways and ramps, where propellers and jets are running, I don't think that the FAA would consider that an unjust request.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All right. If you want to come to them, maybe during the public comment period, or you want to?
Go ahead.
Doug.
Go ahead, John.
John, maybe just from the microphone.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a couple things on what she had presented, just from a skydiving standpoint, right? Because as she mentioned, she's not a skydiver, and in all fairness, it can be a tough thing to be able to talk about without having any experience in it. So one of the things that she had mentioned was the landing areas. Can we go back a slide, possibly? Is that a possibility? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so as you can see here, now we clearly marked the grass strip runway on there, so that's not something that we ever land on or ever intend to land on, right? I mean, obviously, things happen, but planes land in cornfields sometimes. So, I mean, you can't say like, oh, well, what if? I mean, so, but anyways, so the grass strip runway is marked on there, but also, now the area to the north of the grass strip runway, actually, like, it never gets used. We just have it marked on this particular map so that people understand what is considered airport property and what is okay to land on, right? And so, in fact, technically, if they land off unintentionally, it's, by the FAA standards, is considered an emergency landing, so it was permittable anyways. But as far as our landing areas requirement, now the sizing that she had put up on there, I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it was possible to find out the source of that, but I can say that the FAA actually defers to the United States Parachute Association when it comes to landing area size recommendations. And these guidelines are specified in what we call the BSRs. Again, we love our acronyms, but it's the basic safety requirements. And so we have these sizes already designated, and what she had put up on there was definitely not anything I'd ever seen. And so, in fact, our stipulations are much more conservative because I don't know if I'd be comfortable with some of the sizes that were thrown up there. But also, there was one other thing. Yeah, the tandems. So the tandems, you can see where it says D-license only. This is an older map, but where it says D-license only, that's where tandems land. And the tandems make up the 7,000 that I had mentioned, those once a year customers, they make up the majority of those. And all of those people land in that area right there. And so all these people that land there, in fact, as you mentioned, yes, we do have to cross the runway sometimes, but we only do it above 1,000 feet. And so we all been there where we had a bad spot or we got out long or whatever, but we end up on the other side of the runway under 1,000 feet, we're stuck. And you know what? It's better to land over there, and everyone's trained and taught that to do that than to cross the runway under 1,000 feet. Now this corridor that she showed from that other angle, that's actually not as bad just because, like I said, people rarely ever land in any of this area that isn't the highlighted yellow triangle. In fact, we have students that have jumped for their very first time by themselves that land in that yellow triangle very consistently without any radio guidance anyways. We do give them radio guidance, but sometimes the radios don't work, as you know, any pilot will tell you. Now, as far as the other landing areas go, that one actually, again, it's highlighted for the sake of people knowing that this area is cut and prepared for a person to land on, but most people end up landing actually in half of that, the half closer to the hangars, more midfield. And again, that's just because people don't like to walk too far away. Now, as far as walking across the runway goes, when we land on the other side of when our students land on the other side of the runway, we actually have a truck that is committed to going out and picking them up. Now, sometimes that truck is out picking someone else up way out on the other side of the field, but they may walk back. And like I said, we train them on how to do that properly without creating any incidents. And again, if anything ever does come up, or if sometimes, you know, if something does come up, then like I said, we address it, and I'm very strict about that. And anyways, I just wanted to make sure that we touched on those because it sounded like, I don't know, maybe it was a little bit out of her realm of expertise, but I just wanted to provide some input on that. If you have any other questions, though, about anything skydiving related, feel free to ask. Yes?
This is Maria. I'd like to just answer your question there as far as where those numbers came from. They came from the development of criteria for parachute landing areas on airports as published by the FAA in May of 2012.
I'm sorry, what was the publication?
Development of criteria for parachute landing areas on airports.
Yeah, so this is a proposal, right? It's not actually something that the FAA has put in place?
No, it's the guidance, pretty much the only guidance they have for on airports.
So as far as, if you look at the AC, the Advisory Circular for Parachuting Operations, it actually, the most recent circular, it actually indicates that the United States Parachute Association should be referred to, the BSR should be referred to in regards to landing area size requirements.
Not disagreeing. I'm talking about landing on airports.
Okay. Almost every drop zone is on an airport, so, but okay. Anyways, that answers my question. Thank you. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Your Honor, we've got time for public comments. I know Start's got a whole bunch of people here. I might be able to circumvent a lot of that because I think Start has completely misunderstood why we're doing this tonight.